Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Hasan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 100. Yes, we finally made it. This is our big 100th anniversary panel show, and we're going to have a lot of stuff going on today, so you're going to want to keep track of where the puck is going today. Now, this is going to feel like a bonus episode, and as you know, there's no book reading on bonus episodes. But this isn't a bonus episode. As I said, this is our 100th episode in chronological order. And so if you're listening to the audio of this or you're watching the video on YouTube, you're going to want to, like I said, you're going to want to pay attention to what we're doing here today. As I said before, we've arrived at 100 episodes. And so we've got a few people who we'd like to have a few words with us about the show. And so we've collected a panel of individuals, former guest hosts and current guest hosts, to come on to talk about their experiences on the show, what they liked, what they didn't like, what it's like hearing me ramble on and on. And we've also got some interesting video submissions from other folks. And so we'll play some of those today and let you hear those from other guests who came on and guest hosted the show with me. We are also going to talk about what are the maybe problems or challenges of discussing issues, both contemporary and otherwise, at the intersection of leadership and literature. And of course, what it is like to actually see a show like this floating around in the world today, and what it's like to be part of this project. And so today we are joined by Libby Unger, Tom Libby, and Richard Messing. And we will be joined by video with Brian Bagley, John Hill, DeRolo Nixon, RJ St. John, and of course, our good friend of the show, Ryan Stout. And we've got one extra video in there, which should be coming along, loping gently across the countryside of LinkedIn here in the next few minutes while you are listening. So, welcome to the 100th episode of the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Welcome, everybody, today. How are we all doing this morning?
Fine and dandy.
Excellent.
Superb.
All right. This is a podcast of words, so we are going to have to use more than one. So let's go ahead and start poking people, right? First question for the panel. The conceit of this podcast has always been dead simple. I actually said this earlier this year in my New Year's Day episode. And I always do a New Year's Day episode where I kind of talk about what are we going to be doing for the year. And in that episode, I talked about how the conceit of this show is dead simple and always has been. I read a book, usually of the Western canon, usually fictional literature, something that would be considered high literature, try to get a guest on, and we try to pull out leadership insights for people that they can apply in their real lives. And we do this for entrepreneurs, we do this for civic leaders, we do this for listeners. That's who our base, audience is. That's what we're doing here. And so going around the room, when you think about that sort of idea behind a podcast like this, as individual guest hosts and individual guests today, what initially interested you about the podcast and about showing up and doing this, going on this journey with me? Maybe we'll start with Libby, and then we can go to Tom, and then we can go to Richard. Go ahead, Libby.
Terrific. Yeah, what initially really excited me about it was a forcing mechanism for me to read fiction and history at a time when the world was feeling chaotic and I was trying to make sense of the nonsensical. Um, and yeah, I'm great at reading nonfiction when it comes to business, um, growth oriented, learning mindset. But what I really wanted to make sense of was history,
Mhm.
and learning from the masters. And so you and I started off with The Road to Serfdom,
Mhm.
and it was just a breath of fresh air, and it started to make sense of what we were seeing. What I also really enjoy is the heterodox viewpoints, and the ability to kind of speak truth to power, in a world where corporate media, PR, and everything all sounds the same, and it really isn't answering the tough questions. It's answering easy questions. um, and so I wanted to really get into answering the hard questions and having those uncomfortable conversations that we all need to have.
So, what about you, Tom?
If I'm being bluntly honest, it was my sense of skepticism and just honestly, I'm thinking, because when you originally approached me with this, I'm thinking back to what I would consider, the great books of literature and the John Steinbecks of the world, and the, whomever you want to list as your favorites or whatnot. And I'm thinking to myself, what on God's green earth are we going to take out of like a leadership? Like, it didn't. There was a disconnect in my brain, honestly. So what initially interested me about it was, quite simply, how the heck was this really going to work? And could it work? I wasn't even sold that you could really pull leadership lessons out of any of these books. And I was very happy to be proven wrong on most occasions. I still think there's a book or two that you and I have had a little bit of a struggle to really find interesting leadership lessons in, but for the most part, they're there. There are some that are there.
Are you still flummoxed by our Pearl Buck
Pearl
conversation?
Buck, man, I'm telling you, it was definitely Pearl Buck's good earth.
The good earth.
I mean, that was definitely one of them, for sure, that I thought we struggled to really like hone in on an actual lesson. We were
Mhm.
using that particular book. I think we found some quasi lessons that we kind of force fed into the narrative, but yeah, but honestly, what interested me was, I was fascinated by the idea or the concept that it was even possible, right?
Mhm.
And I wanted to see it. I wanted to see it happen. I wanted to see it, because again, you're talking about fiction, and fiction translates to fake, right? Like, it's like in its most basic form. So I'm sitting there thinking, these are literally made up stories. Like, why would a leader even bother trying to translate that into today's version of leadership? So that my initial interest was pure skepticism.
I love it. I love bringing in the skeptical and the true
Sure.
believers alike, and sort of saying, sort of saying, kind of like Michael Jordan used to say to all of his teammates back in the day, trust me, just put it on my shoulders. I got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got it. I will get you to well, I'll get you to the promised land. I'll get you that ring, or at least I'll get you close. Richard, go ahead. Yeah. So what initially attracted you to being on the show?
Speaking of the promised land,
Mm-hmm.
well, first of all, I got to know you fairly well after working with you through the change agent program, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we met for at least 12 weeks, 1 hour a week. I got to know you. And I came to the conclusion that you are definitely uh, not the average person out there when it comes to talking about these topics. And so that was number one. Number two, my focus is on the understanding the human condition and why it's chronically unethical. I mean, ethics has been around, a little less than 4,000 years, and it doesn't seem to help. So leadership is very, very similar in that it's nebulous. Everybody's talking about leadership. everybody's got their own take on it, and there's, nobody really understands it really. Just like same thing with ethics. There's something about ethics that we just don't understand, because it should help, right? It should help, but we see that the human condition is still chronically unethical. Leadership is very similar in that respect. Why don't we have outstanding leaders? What's so difficult about producing outstanding leaders? Mm-hmm. Why do we feel that there's a dearth of leadership all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. And so that really fascinates me. And so the approach you're taking by studying literature from the angle of leadership is something I've never seen before. So that's why I'm very interested in what you're doing, and I think that you're blazing a new trail.
Well, I'll tell you, that's the kind of feedback, Richard, that I get from a lot of folks, and folks who listen to the show. And typically, our audience is sort of the college educated, not really upper middle class, sort of maybe middle class, management / civic leader type, right? 45 to 60, sort of in that range. People who are looking to connect what they experienced in the past. Like one of the things that Tom and I always talk about is how many of these books he read in high school, right? That's where I sort of picked up that line that I put in the intro, right? And many of us got that solid, or at least got the back end of a solid classical education. I remember reading Jane Austen when I was 15 and not understanding anything about Sense and Sensibility. And then reading it again as a 45-year-old man and going, oh, this is what she was talking about. And there are lessons in Jane Austen talking about, to Tom's point, talking about how do you pull lessons from something that seems obscure. Well, if you want to learn about emotional intelligence, you can either learn about it through Dan Goldman, which is fine. Dan Goldman's great. I have the book Emotional Intelligence. But if you actually want to see how that actually plays in practice, sometimes fiction can say more truth than research in fact actually can, right? Because research in fact can give you the what, but the why and the how and the intuitive parts have to come through Shakespeare or Austen or biblical writers or John Steinbeck or even Pearl Buck. And so that's sort of some of the feedback that I've been getting from folks. Okay, so talk a little bit about that. Richard, you mentioned your view of leadership and how it's amorphous, right? So I want to play off of that a little bit. And so I'll kick this to Tom. You had some concerns as well about how do we tie this, right? How is this even going to work? It seems like a balancing act. What is your view of leadership? Let's talk about that, because you didn't really directly address that on the show. We kind of talked through it. I remember our most recent episode that we did talking about Invisible Man. That was another one where we didn't come to any conclusions at the end of that episode, right? And you mentioned even at the end of the episode, flakes of gold are worth thousands of dollars, folks. So just keep that in mind, yeah. Right? But what is your view of leadership? What does leadership mean? And then how can a leader use literature to kind of inform that? What does that mean for you, Tom? And then we'll go to Richard, we'll go to Libby.
Well, I don't know if that's really a fair question to a certain degree, because I don't think there, again, what Richard was talking about a second ago, I don't know of anybody else who tries to tie great literature into leadership. I think people have read them, and I think there might be lessons that they sit in the back of their brain without knowing. I think there's just a happenstance that they will think of something that happened in a book and be like, I don't even think I don't think that it makes a connection half the time, right? So something that you might have read in a Jane Austen or Steinbeck or whomever, and then years later you find yourself in a situation where you're reacting the way that a character in those books would. I don't think that you're going to think of that book at that moment and say, oh, that's why I thought that, or that's where. I just don't think you make that connection. So I think that, like to Richard's point, I think that doing this can really open up people's minds into thinking a bit more creatively about leadership versus the spreadsheets, numbers, and like, because if you think about it, and I'm talking specifically for myself because I'm a sales and marketing consultant, most of what we think of in sales and marketing is driven by KPIs and numbers and ROIs and things like that, where you're either in the net positive or net negative, and if you're in the net negative, you have to go fix something, right? You have to go run and fix something, or you're changing your roles and responsibilities of your team based on strengths and weaknesses that you see in the results. So it's very difficult for me in that moment to think, what would Pearl Buck do? Right? Or very hard to think in that moment, oh, Hassan and I were just talking about this when we were talking about bury my heart at Wounded Knee, or or what have you, right? So, but to answer the beginning part of this question, I think, to me, if I was to define leadership, which, by the way, I've never really, again, back to Richard's point, I've never really, you can look up all the definitions you want, right? Like, you can look up all the definitions on Google and Wikipedia, whatever, and there's about a million of them out there that what defines leadership. And then you ask Google or ChatGPT a more difficult question, which is, find me a good example of true leadership, or find me an example of good leadership. That becomes a much harder conversation to do online. So defining that, I think, is kind of important, because I think there's a very big difference. I think there's a very big gap of what people think of true leadership and awesome leadership, like the Martin Luther Kings of the world and the John F. Kennedys of the world, Mahatma Gandhi. Like, those people are what we think of. In the reality, the guy that owns the convenience store down the street could probably be a phenomenal community leader, very good activist for the local neighborhood, because and so I don't look at it from a linear perspective of like, this is good leadership, this is bad leadership. I think most of it is definitely situational, but I think some of the characteristics are there, which is, service above self, which is like, you care more about servicing others than you care about your own advancement. Your ambitions are not driven by personal gain. That, like, certain things, I think there are certain characteristics that do fall under anybody that you would identify as a good leader. I like to try to take out military personnel in that, because by the time you become a good, like, world recognized leader, you're beyond the do this because I said so kind of mentality and the leadership roles of most military. But when you're talking about the Churchills of the world and Patton, those guys, they've got a charisma about them that kind of elevates them beyond the military status. So, but I do think that there are certain characteristics that you'll find in leadership that are relatively universal, and I think a couple of them that I mentioned apply. And I'm sure there are more, but to me, I think the number one to me is not putting your own ambitions above the overall objective, allowing your goal orientation to be for the universal good of either the company, the team, whatever you're trying to lead, versus, if I do this right, I get a promotion. I think that's really for me, that's the foundational point. I know there are several others, and I'll let the other guys talk about the ones that they find, but that's, for me, that's at least the starting point.
Yeah. Okay. Richard?
Well, the question is to define leadership. That's the question.
How do you define leadership? Yeah.
A leader is someone who has followers. So if you have followers, you're a leader. That's essentially what a leader is. If everybody's a leader, you don't have any leaders, because you have to have followers to be a leader. Okay, and so same thing with followers. If everybody's a follower, then there are no followers, because in order to be a follower, you need a leader.
Right.
And so it's paradoxical. Leaders and followers need each other. They're equally important. You can't have one without the other, and you have to be able to do both. So, for example, in business, right, you've got people who lead teams, and the team members are following the leader. But when the followers have to interact with their customers, they have to be able to lead their customers. They have to be a leader in relationship to their customers. They have to be able to lead the customer to the promised land, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so that follower has to also be a leader. And so, yeah, it's paradoxical in that sense. You know, that's the basic principle of my work is that the human condition is fundamentally paradoxical. And this is a good example of it. This is a good example of it. So all the things that people are talking about, like what are the attributes of a great leader, all of that stuff, I think is interesting. I do believe that great leaders know how to speak to the hearts of other people. They know how to inspire people. You don't have to be charismatic to be a great leader. As a matter of fact, Lao Tzu said that the greatest leaders are those who know what needs to get done, knows how to interact and influence people to get those things done, such that the people who are doing the work think that they are the ones that thought it up. And so a true leader, nobody really knows who the true leader is.
Right.
And so, but people have the opposite idea that the leaders have to be out there in front, and everybody has to know who the leader is, and leaders have to be present, and leaders have to be blah 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 blah. And so I disagree with that. Though there are some leaders are like that, some leaders aren't like that. I actually believe that that's why, you know, in my own work, I actually, I mean, I'm just giving my own personal experience from my own, you know, my own life. I never considered myself a leader. You know, growing up, it was just to wonder, how would these guys in my school, how did they become so popular? How did they become, you know, how did they become a leader? And you know, many leaders that we see, you think, how did these people?
Right. Why is it this guy?
Why this guy? You know, because you know, some of these people are really like, you know, not competent. They're, you know, they're some people. I mean, some people are diabolical, and yet they become leaders. So it's a strange. That's what I was saying before. It's a strange sort of a thing. This whole phenomenon of leadership. But I do believe that great leaders know something about the human condition that enables them to speak to the hearts of people. They sort of intuitively know what motivates people, and but the great leaders know how to empower other people to become better versions of themselves. And they're great teachers also. They're great teachers. That's, I think, one of the superpowers of a great leader is the ability to teach. Yeah.
Okay. Libby? I know you've been itching to go.
Yeah, that's terrific. Yeah. So the way that I think about it is, you know, first and foremost, leaders inspire individuals to action around like a clear mission or vision. I think of leaders as coaches. You know, it can be, you know, broad-based, scanning the entire environment, you know, understanding the conditions of the environment and where we need to go and the trade-offs that we need to make given what the environment looks like, whether it's KPIs that are setting our day-to-day actions or larger strategic objectives that we have that dictate the bolder decisions that we need to make. But one is leaders inspire individuals to action. They empower individuals, and it's about, you know, and to Richard's point, it is about unleashing their potential, you know, to grow and to thrive. So leaders create the conditions for individuals, teams, and organizations to thrive. For me, the most important element of leadership is walking the talk. And this is the piece that we're not seeing today is where principles are sacrificed in order to attain short-term gain or personal ambition. And so for me, it's about always letting your principles drive decisions. And that means making tough decisions, not easy decisions. I think in one of the earlier podcasts that we did together, Hasan, I talked about wanting to be respected and not liked.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I want to be liked, and I think like and respect can go together. But if I have to choose respect over like, I'm going to choose respect. And too many leaders want to be liked. We have a president right now that changes his views decade to decade based on how, whether whether people will like him for it or not. And his principles have been completely turned upside down from 1990 to 2020 because he wants to be liked. I use him as an example. I think you could look at most politicians and see that as well. But you also see that in business leaders.
Mm-hmm.
The means justify the ends. And for me, our principles drive all of our decisions. And we need to make tough decisions and walk our talk. And the reason, I also see leaders, sometimes you need the leader who's up front, charging the way, anticipating barriers and hurdles and removing them. Sometimes the leader is right next to you, coaching and partnering with you. And other times the leader is behind you, supporting you to grow and to thrive. So leaders are really coaches creating the conditions for individuals to thrive. But the most important piece that we're lacking today, society-wise, is people care too much about being liked. It's the easy decisions, hard life versus hard decisions, easy life. Mm-hmm. We're seeing a lot of easy decisions for immediate likability and an endorphin rushes. And we're not thinking long-term about the right decisions that will create the conditions for society, businesses, and individuals to thrive.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say, Libby, directly to your point, I think there was a big paradigm shift with social media and all the little like buttons replacing the old adage that there's no such thing as bad publicity, right? Like, so even if you had a controversial statement and somebody was ripping you on the news or in newspapers or whatever, that was still okay because you were still getting the attention to the subject matter, versus today it's all about how many likes you get. So I think you're right that there's way too much emphasis on being liked versus, and you can interchange respect with a couple of different words, but I agree with you in that sense for sure.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to watch how, and we're going to talk about culture in a minute. We're going to run a couple of videos and we're going to talk about culture. We're going to switch to talk about that. But it's interesting to see how the societal perception of leadership has shifted, right? Now, to Richard's point, I think that leadership has always been a paradox. I actually agree with that. This is why there's over 400,000 volumes on leadership alone in Amazon.com. It's the largest category on that platform. I even wrote this in my book, my third book, 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation of Intentional Leadership, right? And yes, I did write a book on leadership. The irony is not lost on me. God is not without a sense of humor, it appears.
The question is, how many people are following you? That's the question.
That is the question, right? That is that is the question. And so when you look at leadership, when you look at how leadership is defined, everybody can spot, and I wrote this in my book, everyone can spot what leadership is, but everybody also knows when leadership is absent. That's the thing we all share in common. We know when there's no one running the ship, and we know when there's someone running the ship. After that, it sort of breaks down, right? It breaks down into our individual experiences. It breaks down into, to Richard's point, our individual paradoxes. It breaks down to Libby's point about, do I like this person or do I want to respect them? How do I personally feel about them? And to Tom's point, you layer in technology, and now we've got a factor of scale going there. It's no longer just and Tom made a great point about this, it's no longer just the convenience store clerk down the street who is my civic leader. And by the way, there was a lot of that in the 20th century, right? The civil rights movements of America started because of individual preachers, individual convenience store owners, individual entrepreneurs in communities looking around saying, this isn't something that we want in our community, not America, in our community. Let's go fix this. This is typically how civil rights movements in the mid 20th century began. But what has happened with scale, and we could talk about this when we talk about culture, is as we've scaled up to a global culture, I believe fundamentally we're now in the process, and it's going to be a long process. This is a 500-year long kind of process. We're at the beginning of it, but we are scaling into a global culture with all of the problems that come along with that. And I don't even know if we can get there from here. I'm not convinced we can, but I am convinced that, to Richard's point, ethical, competent leadership that's not psychopathic or sociopathic, we definitely don't want at a global level. And how does a person move from, and this is a huge challenge question for all of us, how does a person move from their community and their family to, if they want, The Hague or Brussels? Is there a path there for a leader, or is that not something we even need to be worried about, right? And that's sort of something that we look at these books through multiple lenses, and this is something I think we can find some of the answers to that question inside some of these great books. Now, I can see folks are itching to kind of jump on some ideas that I had, so please take notes. I'm going to go ahead and share a couple of videos. People are itching. I see my folks itching, and when you watch this on the video, you'll see my folks itching my panel itching to jump on some of that. But I want them to hold their powder for just a moment. We're going to share a couple of videos. So the first one is from Brian Bagley. He was a guest on, oh gosh, I can't remember which episode, but he sent in a couple of videos, or he sent in a video. So we're going to take a look at that. It's only about a minute long. And then we're also going to take a look at a video from another guest, RJ St. John. So let's go ahead and take a look at this video. First one up from Brian Bagley.
Hello, my name is Brian Bagley, and I guest hosted 2 episodes of the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast with Hasan Sorrells. I am a West Point graduate, a veteran of the United States Army, an ordained minister, and currently serve as a financial advisor. One of the things that I have loved about Hasan's podcast is he is teaching people how to think. Thinking is a lost art in our culture, and thinking well is an even more lost art. And I love what he's doing. I love the questions that he asks. His questions are very, very probing, and they really help people think through the issues. So it's been a pleasure to be a part of that for me personally. I know he's helped me think through issues. And he's always challenging me in the books that he's reading to grow as well. So anyway, I just want to congratulate him on his 100th podcast. I think his show is doing some amazing things, filling a void that our society desperately needs, that others need to hear. And anyway, and it's an encouragement to a lot of people. So congratulations, Hasan, on your 100th podcast, because who does 100 of anything these days? So kudos to you, my friend, and best of luck. I hope you have 100 more. Thanks.
Hi, my name is RJ, and I hosted an episode with Hasan with Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. And the book that we did was about FACE, which was a very, very good book, a military book, Colonel David Hackworth. And it was interesting getting a non-military perspective on that particular book from somebody who I've known a very, very long time in Hasan. So I think that it's good because even civilians can learn a lot from military leadership, and military leadership can actually learn a lot from civilians as well, because it's 2 different styles of thought, it's 2 different schools of thought. And I think that what he's doing here is really good because it's bringing us together and giving us the ability to share ideas, some of which originated thousands of years ago. So I think the show is doing well, and I'm looking forward to seeing just how long that we can keep this thing going. Hopefully we'll hit episode number 200, and I don't know, maybe someday episode 1,000. Good luck, buddy.
All right. So that was those were two videos. One from RJ. He came on our episode. We talked about Colonel David Hackworth's About Face, which is a great book. By the way, I would recommend you going and reading that book, and I'll have links to all of the books that are referenced by our guests in the show notes below the player. And of course, Brian Bagley. And Brian Bagley and RJ both share a similar perspective because they both came out of the military. So Brian Bagley graduated from West Point and served in Iraq, and then RJ served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He did 2 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so I have a heart for folks who have done military service, because I do believe fundamentally the military service, among other things, teaches people life lessons that they can learn in no other way. There is something you learn about the sharpness of leadership when a bullet flies past your head and you all of a sudden realize that, oh, that guy actually means to kill me. And he's serious. And it's not better. It's just a different sort of way of thinking about leadership and followership that impacts how you think about everything else. And so both Brian and RJ have been on a couple of episodes, and they'll be on a couple more episodes this year. And so it's just interesting to get their perspective on these books. And by the way, RJ is a big fan of Shakespeare, and of classical literature as well, as are many folks who are in the military, because as he pointed out, a lot of these ideas are thousands of years old. There is, as Tom Libby keeps saying to me, no new thing under the sun.
I think the actual verbiage, Hasan, is the more things change, the more things stay the same. I've said that several times on this podcast.
Well, speaking of things changing, so let's take a turn and let's talk a little bit about culture, right? So Libby brought this up. I don't want to have Libby have a first crack at this. One of the things that always comes through whenever Libby and I talk, and we always wind up talking about, this in one form or another, depending upon what book we're talking about, and we'll probably talk about it more this year. We do wind up talking about culture, and we do wind up sort of wandering around politics. Now, this is not a political show, but books that are of a political nature have influenced how we think about leadership. They just are, right? And the world we live in now, the postmodern world we live in now, seeks to make everything about the political. Literally everything, from our identity and how we walk through the world to choices we make about what food we eat. I mean, my gosh, I've heard of like the politicization of one of the interesting things to me that's happening right now in the cultural zeitgeist is the politicization of going to the gym and working out. Like, apparently, if you go to the gym and work out, you're a right winger. And I'm like, that's ridiculous to me. Yeah, I saw an article in Slate the other day, and I was like, what being fit is a right. And then Tom, this is why we don't really talk about this kind of stuff, but Tom rubs his face. And it's like, what are we doing here? Right. And I just shake my head and I move on. I move on. I try to, and Libby and I are both denizens of Twitter. Formerly Twitter, now X. And you see a lot of that in the roiling of the zeitgeist underneath everything that's going on in our culture. One of the points that I make in the podcast open is that we are saving Western civilization one book at a time. Now, that's a big, hairy goal, and I know we're not. Well, I won't say I know we're not. I believe we can get there on a long enough timeline. I have big, ambitious goals. Let's talk a little bit about culture and sort of how that influences this podcast. And I'd like to start with Libby with that. This is not a political podcast, but we read political books. This is not necessarily a cultural podcast, but we do read books that influence culture. Um, how does this show, where does this show fit, right? And you kind of touched on this a little bit in your initial remarks, Libby, about where the show fits with culture, but where can we go with this, right? Let's start thinking about where we're now and where we can go. I mean, we're in an election year that influences everything, and then we'll be past an election year, we'll be on to something else. And we all come out of COVID now. We all sort of collectively went through that experience. How does this show fit and influence culture? How do you see that, and how can we do that better?
I love this. I love this question and this podcast for this, or these discussions for that reason. I mean, to Tom's point, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I remember that was one of the common application questions back, when I was applying to colleges.
Mm-hmm.
And, in 1988, I didn't have context for that, even though, we read history and literature. Now, having lived through a few cycles at the age of 53, I do see that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And by reading, if it's King Lear to The Road to Serfdom, to a Hemingway and The Sun Also Rises, you see common themes around the human nature and human spirit. And you brought up earlier the fact that where everything is political now, and people aren't thinking anymore. Like, the more information we have, the less people have the ability to contextualize it and and critically think. So we've lost religion. We have too much information to process, and we don't have the skills to actually process. And what I mean by the skills, I think about 10 years ago, I said we had a critical thinking crisis. We also saw the emergence of an accountability lacking crisis starting about 10 years ago. But what we miss from a skills perspective is people don't know how to assess risk. All risks are not created equal. People don't understand basic statistics and math, and people don't understand basic economics. So, basic theories of supply and demand, where you can actually start to contextualize what is happening around us and human incentives to behave a certain way based on, risk, economics, statistics, as well as the cultural need to be seen. So this rise in being liked, to me, is because people aren't being seen and aren't doing esteemable acts. So they're constantly getting external validation. They're not they don't have ethics from a religious perspective. They're not able to make sense of the world. It feels chaotic because they can't contextualize things. The books help contextualize, right? Like understanding history, understanding literature, but also those basic math, statistics, economics. If you don't understand that and you don't understand human nature, you're going to feel really chaotic. And so what are people looking for? They're looking for likes, and they're acting just for the like. They're so detached from who they are as humans. And that's one of the things that Hasan and I have talked about a lot, is this detachment. This hyper thinking world, people think their thoughts are real. They're completely detached from what it means to be human. And your ability to assess risks and understand the world around you, like gardening is a really good example. Working out, athletics, things that help you understand what you're capable of and to make sense of the nonsensical. We just, we have this society right now that thinks thinking is reality, and they have no way to actually counterbalance what they're seeing and thinking with true reality. So I'll stop there. There's a lot there, but we need to get back down to our humanity. Actually, I'm not going to stop. The military, the thing that I think is really important about the military, and one of the things that I've been proposing to folks is a year of service, is the military actually helps to, everyone comes together from all walks of life. And you realize that at our essence, we're a lot more similar than we're dissimilar. So you're bringing people from all classes, races, genders around a common mission. And it doesn't matter. Your status doesn't matter. Your ability to actually problem solve and, and protect is what matters. And you really start to realize that we're much more alike than dissimilar.
Yeah. Richard, you look like you've got some thoughts there, particularly on the ethical piece that maybe Libby brought up there. So go ahead.
Well, Libby, just about every key word that you used in your description, your answer to the culture question, is contained in the change agent course that I've been teaching now for 2 years. Risk, making sense of the world, ethics, being seen, thinking is reality. It's really not reality. The whole question of reality. All of this pertains, in my work, to the human condition. And so freedom, I think the one word you didn't use that I think is absolutely essential is freedom. What freedom actually is. And so I think there's an enormous amount of confusion around this, around what freedom is and where it comes from. Ethics is the same. I mean, people are not talking about ethics. It's not part of the societal narrative. You don't hear people having conversations about ethics. But if you ask them how important is ethics to you, they'll say, oh, it's like a 9 or a 10. If you ask them, does the world need to become more ethical? Like everybody says, what are you kidding me? Look at what's going on in the world. Yes, the world needs to become more ethical. The public schools don't teach ethics. The universities don't require one ethics course for undergraduate, for almost all undergraduate programs. So this is a mystery. What freedom is also a mystery. People think freedom is the ability to do whatever you want, whenever you want, without having to answer to anybody. That's freedom, right? And so that's not what real freedom is, but people don't think that. It's like an unconscious mindset that's why everybody's trying to become wealthy, because if you're wealthy, you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, without answering to anybody. You can hire people to do all the things you don't want to do, and they have to answer to you. This is what's going on. It's massive confusion, in my opinion. And so, when you have a confused culture about what it really means to be human, you get what we have today. And so I think the most important thing is understanding what the truth actually, not what the truth is, but like what the word truth means itself. And so I think there's a lot of confusion around that. So the question is the question about what the relationship between culture and leadership, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, fundamentally, and this is why sort of, this show exists, right? One of the things that I really wanted to do with this, one of the conceits all the way underneath, and it kind of took me a long time to understand that this was the thing that I could do with this, was to use the books to clear out some of the cultural confusion.
Okay, so let me speak to that.
Yeah.
I think the reason why what you're doing is so amazingly powerful is because great literature describes the human condition in a way that reaches deep down into people, and they see the human condition for what it really is. And that's the thing that I think what you're doing is so powerful. Leadership is part, this phenomenon called leadership is a fundamental part of the human condition that we're very confused about. And great literature exposes these mysteries in a way that resonates with people and moves people and touches people. And so that's why I think what you're doing is super powerful and very, very needed. Frankly, I was not a reader. I read very little when I was a youngster. I think one of the only books I remember reading was called The Promise.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that book? The Promise?
Yeah.
The Chosen? The Chosen and The Promise. Those I didn't read. And so I still don't actually read literature. I still don't read literature. And it's definitely, that's why I love what you're doing. Because by participating in your podcasts, I'm learning literature through you. Mm. Now, and because I'm so interested in the human condition, I study the human condition not through literature. I study it through other kinds of texts.
Right.
And so that's why I love what you're doing, and I want to do more of it with you. And I consider you to be actually one of the most important collaborators that I have in the work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
For that reason. And so culture is a reflection, in my opinion, of the extent to which we understand the human condition. The less we understand the human condition, the culture is going to reflect that, and we're going to see these like crazy problems happening and just bubbling up in society and around the world. Everybody knows in their heart the world doesn't have to be the way that it is. In our hearts, we know we can have peace, we can have human flourishing, we can all get along. In our hearts, we know this is possible. But we don't know how to make it happen.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think this is why what you're doing is so important, because it educates people on the human condition in a very powerful way. And I think it opens people's minds up to be able to see the world more accurately. The Bible is probably the best, the Old Testament is probably the best description of the human condition that's ever been written. And I think that's why it's the most widely read book that has ever been written.
It is without a doubt. I mean, far and away, the most read book in the course of, in the course of human history, the course of human reading. And we do talk about the Bible on the podcast. We have talked about that, most notably with Brian Bagley, because he is an ordained minister. And so you do kind of want to get that approach or that perspective from a person who's actually been trained in how to read the Bible. But every time I interview or every time I talk with Brian, so we talked about our first episode that we did was on 1 Kings and 2 Kings, and talking about how the civil magistrate relates to the state, how the church relates to the civil magistrate. In essence, asking and answering the question, how do we keep Caesar, to use the Roman conception of Caesar, how do we keep Caesar or the king or even the president in a box? How do we do that collectively as a society? Because this is a New Testament idea, but we as believers, we as believers are the ecclesia. We're the people whose responsibility it is to lead the state. That is an idea that is in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, quite frankly. And it's our job to sort of put Caesar in a box and keep Caesar in a box. And if we don't do that, to paraphrase from Elon Musk recently in a tweet that he sent to a rapper and a fitness guy named Zuby. We're screwed, quote unquote. And so we talked a little bit about that in our episode with Brian Bagley. Tom, we don't really get that deep on culture with you, and I don't really get that deep on culture with that. We kind of go in other areas. We tend to focus a little bit more on business, but I do think this culture piece is important. We did kind of touch on a little bit of it in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, a little bit on it in The Burglar's Christmas, where we talked about the Willa Cather book. And so we're kind of wandering a little bit closer to it, but we tend to stay more in the business space. So, but business is impacted by culture too. We just had a conversation in Invisible Man around DEI, and what that's looking like, right?
Native son,
around DEI, right? Yeah, that's right. Because I did Invisible Man with DeRollo. We'll have DeRollo's video coming up here in just a moment. But that culture is starting to crash into business now. And it's been crashing into business, and even Libby knows this, for the last 20, 30 years. Really crashing. What should business say about culture, right? I know you've been listening to Richard and Libby and been thinking about this. What does business have to say about any of this? I know the Milton Friedman idea that the only purpose of business is to make money. I get that part. And I also know the Thomas Sowell idea that, the world is full of vicious trade-offs, right? We live in a world of limited resources with vicious trade-offs. Sorry. That's why economics is the dismal science. It's going to make you depressed before it's going to make you happy. Because it's the place where you find out just how limited your resources are and just how vicious the trade-offs are, right? But after that, if you're building to scale an organization where people are coming in from the outside, and this has been something I've found tricky myself in my training and development work, where people are coming in from the outside who bring their culture with them to your thing you're building. They bring their pink hair and their tattoos and their political ideas and and their stuff, and you're hiring them to fill out a spreadsheet and do the work, and they think that you're hiring them to have their pink hair, their tattoos, and all of their political beliefs. And that's where business and culture sort of crash together. What do you think of this idea? And how do we navigate that? We've never really talked about that on the podcast, but we can talk about it a little bit right now. Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders.
Well, I've obviously been listening to you guys, and I'm sitting here thinking, so, for me, culture, just the word culture alone could mean 100 different things, right? And whether you're talking about a specific ethnicity, a specific race, a specific area of the country, we have a culture here in the Northeast, and Richard, I believe you're in New York, right? So the culture in the Northeast is very different from the culture in the Southwest, even in a business sense, right? Mm-hmm. We tend to be fast talkers, mover shakers. We want things done today, tomorrow, blah, 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 whatever. People down south, I have a couple of clients in North Carolina, and sometimes I have to speed them up. Just get to your point, right? I need to go. This meeting is only an hour. Let's go. Anyway. So I think, and then what you're talking about is personality cultures, right? So something that influences me on a personal level, I'm going to bring to work, which quite honestly, if I'm getting the outcome and the output that I want, I don't care. Like I'm not putting that much emphasis on 40 years ago. You wouldn't be hired if you had a tattoo on your arm, right? If you were in a certain area, because we don't want tattoos to be seen. Now people have tattoos everywhere and nobody cares anymore, right? So there's been a huge, paradigm shift into the way we view tattoos. So a lot of those things kind of apply, right? Whether your hair is pink, your tattoos, where you start feeling the pain is more what you were talking about a second ago, some political views. Like Republicans don't want to hire Democrats. Democrats don't want to hire Republicans because you don't want to talk politics at work. And you can solve some of that, not all of it, but you can solve some of that by having very clear and defined HR rules in place. Like, you can, if you're going to talk politics, it has to be in this manner. You have to be respectful of other people. There's certain ways you can address it. Now, until you get to a bigger size company, a lot of times that's really just conversations with people. It's really like, being open and honest with each other, being open, clear. Listen, I live in Massachusetts. It's literally quite possibly the most liberal state in the country. I have a tendency to be a little bit more middle of the road than most people I live around. I'm not necessarily left. I'm not necessarily right. It's very circumstantial for me, depending on what subject matter we're talking about. Okay. So for me, I think it would be easier to own a company in Massachusetts because of middle of the road, somebody coming in strong left or strong right. I don't care. As long as you're getting the job done, I'll talk politics with you all day. And I have a very easy, I was brought up in a way that it's okay. You can agree to disagree and still be friends. Like we've lost. So to your point a little while ago, Libby, where some of this stuff that you lose, like we've lost the ability to disagree and stay friends. Now, all of a sudden, we have to agree to be friends. That really limits our mindset. It really limits how, again, something Libby said earlier about our critical thinking theory, how we go about problem solving and how we go about it really limits that. We really need to stop that. We need to stop that right now. Now, somebody who's extremely far left and extremely far right, we should not expect them to be friends. I get that. I understand that. But for the most people, I would say a very high majority of people, we're not that far left or that far right on every single issue. It's usually an issue or two. So if we can come to the middle of the road on most of these issues and start using critical thinking theories better and being able to agree to disagree, walk away as friends, things like that, like I think that's an important cultural shift. And I think sometimes, again, back to this particular question about this podcast and how this kind of influences some of that, I think you do that. I think you manage some of those conversations really well. And you basically lead by example. If somebody's listening to this and they can hear you and I have a complete disagreement about a certain portion of a book, and then go on to the next portion and go, yeah, I agree with you, buddy. Like, I think that's a big deal. And I think people can learn from that. I really do. But I do think, like everything else, I think culture starts at home. And I think there's a lot of things that we can teach. I go back to Libby's comment about being respected versus liked. When I have 5 children, when I raised my 5 kids, I told them flat out the gate, I'm more concerned about you respecting me than liking me as a parent. I was just very clear on that. And you are going to respect my rules. You're going to respect my thoughts. You're going to respect my opinions. And if you don't like it, that's tough expletive, whatever you.
Right.
But
you were raising your children the same way my parents raised me. So there we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as they become adults, and now we are very friendly now that they're all adults and we can go out and have a beer and we can talk about whatever they want. And now I respect their opinion in return because they have shown me that they understand and know how to have that agree to disagree mentality, like and still be friends and still be family for that matter. So I think there's a lot of stuff. I mean, when you think about culture, I think that is such a dynamic topic that could probably be a multiple podcast all by itself, right? Yeah. So and I don't think we're going to solve that on this version on your.
I have a solution.
I have the
Oh,
solution.
he's got a solution. Richard's got a solution.
Yeah, but Libby has her hand up. We should probably
ask Libby though. Richard, hold on to your solution. Libby's got her hand up. Go ahead. Libby's been having her hand up halfway through Tom talking. Go ahead.
Yeah, so culture is the informal way that things actually get done. So there's the professed way that we say we want to get things done, and then culture is the actual way when people aren't looking that we get things done, and that can be society-wise, business, organization. The thing that the challenge that we've had in the work environment is it's moved from, like it's very tangible in sales and marketing. Like that's the most tangible piece of the business. You're meeting quota, you're not meeting quota.
Right.
Right. You do
That's
A/B
one of the reasons
testing.
why I loved it so much, because I could never be accused of being discriminatory. It was really simple. You either did or didn't. I either fire you or I don't, based on your numbers. So anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. And
I loved it, though.
I've been working in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco for the last 30 plus years. And we focused on building great products that our customers loved and creating conditions for everyone to thrive. One of the things that has shifted, and I think this is a byproduct of societal culture, is an entitlement where people think their jobs are given to them and it's a handout, right? And as an employee, I've always had the mindset that I'm there to create value, right? This is a partnership with me and the business where I help create value and you compensate me for that. And as long as we're creating value and, profitability is really important, because profitability means we can reinvest in the business. We can continue to deliver great products that our customers love, develop partnerships, help the whole ecosystem thrive, and create conditions where employees can grow and they have new opportunities. So profit is not a bad thing until profit is all that matters. Mm-hmm. Right? Like we got to care about the customer, the partner, the employee, and the investor, and make those tough trade-offs for all to thrive. The challenge that I've observed, especially in the last 10 years, is it's people feel their jobs are given to them and owed to them, and the conversations are not predominantly about building great product, delivering great product, selling great product. It's more about these things that are outside of our life, our outside life that is now becoming dominant in the business. And we used to have the rules when I was growing up that you don't talk religion, you don't talk politics, you don't talk about how much money you make. And
sex, money, and politics never belong in the workplace.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And I've lived and worked in San Francisco for over 20 years. I can tell you that I didn't know anyone's politics. People didn't know mine. I didn't know people's sexual proclivities. I didn't really care. They don't know mine. Right. Or they, when I had close friends and developed them, sure. But it wasn't the predominant. And
right. I agree.
And that's because we're working towards a common mission, and we were focused on, solving big problems and delivering, and we didn't have time for all this other stuff to seep in. I think we have a free money environment right now where there's too much free money. Capital is free. That the ability to actually results don't really matter. It's about basically the hot potato, packaging your business so that the next person is stuck with the bad, non-profitable business and you move on to the next thing. So results don't really matter anymore. People don't feel that they have to work and earn their job, because there's so many jobs available. Like I can just, package myself one way. People will believe it. Like how many serial entrepreneurs are there out there? Like,
oh my,
yes. Serial entrepreneurs by the age of 23. I don't know. I mean, I guess, I had a lawn mowing business. Me and my lawnmower when I was 10 I was an entrepreneur. Okay. But I just think that going back to no sex, no religion, no politics at work, and just motivating around big problems and people feeling rewarded for actually doing esteemable things at work will
Here's a
help to
problem.
solve part of the problem.
Here's a problem that you don't address with that though, right, Libby? Which
Yeah.
is, again, I go back to social media is part of the problem, because even if you don't talk about those things at work, you're still seeing people talk about them on social. You already know their sexual proclivities, their political standing. You already know that stuff because of social media. So you don't have to have the conversation at the water cooler anymore. You can just walk in the door and be like, I don't like that person. Like, so again, I think the problem is bigger than just that at the workplace.
I do agree somewhat with that, but I'm not against knowing those things about individuals and finding
I get
them.
that.
The challenge is, when we used to work and people didn't know how I voted. I've been a registered independent, since Anderson ran in 1978, and I couldn't vote, or was it 80?
It was 80. 1980.
And so it's more about when we're at work. Yeah, you can have some of the conversations, and I think having water cooler conversations is great, but we've gotten to the point where we don't talk about business anymore. And it's a replacement for community. It's a replacement for church. It's a replacement for team sports, and business just needs to be about creating value for customers. And if you want to do things that are associated with your business, off time, awesome. Companies, we do that. We have baseball teams, and we have, political, events.
So you want to get rid of you want to get more back to community. I want to get rid of social media. Richard said he had a solution. So
great.
What's your solution?
Yeah, what is your solution, Richard?
Nice facilitation.
Richard's solution makes it sound more definitive than what we're talking about.
Well, I'm going to try to simplify it a little bit. Birds traffic in the air, fish traffic in the water, human beings traffic in symbols. Language is a system of symbols. And if you don't understand this, and you don't understand the basic dynamics of language, we're never going to solve this problem. Leaders have to understand how to drive the conversations and the dialogues and discussions and debates that happen in their organizations or in their communities. And if they don't know how to do that, you're going to have, what's going on. You're going to have culture crashing into businesses, and it's going to get chaotic. So a leader just has to know, when people start talking about things that have nothing to do with the business, and they're talking about politics or religion or DEI or sex and these other things, that's nothing to do with the business. They have to be able to explain to the people who are having these conversations and bringing those conversations into the organization that this is not what the organization is about. If you want to create a club, or you want to create some kind of a group that has nothing to do with the business, and that's fine. But this is not what we're going to spend our time talking about. That's number one. Number two, there's only one human genome, right? Everybody is the same when it comes to the structure of the human genome. Yet there's incredible diversity. Everybody's got a different fingerprint. Everybody has a different, unique combination of genetic codes that defines how our bodies are, how they turn out, the color of our hair, how tall we are, etc. So it's paradoxical. At the same time, we're all the same, yet we're all different. And if we don't understand that simple principle, and if we don't respect each other for our differences, we are screwed. To use the term of, who said that? Who's the guy?
That was Elon Musk.
Well, look, he's right. He's absolutely right. If we don't understand that basic principle and we don't respect each other, Tom, you used the word respect at least a half a dozen times when you started talking about culture. That's the number one ethical principle. We have to respect each other regardless of our differences. Ethics is the final frontier. I'm saying it right now on this 100th podcast. Ethics is the final frontier. That's what's missing. We have to have a code of ethics that we can all agree to, a basic one that will enable us to maximize human flourishing, whether it's in business, in our communities, in the general society. Human flourishing is what we all want. And we have to understand that we can't, obviously, history shows us that we're incapable of making the optimal decisions when it comes to interacting with other people. I assert here that the problem is false beliefs about the human condition. We can't know what our false beliefs are, because if we knew what they were, we wouldn't believe them in the first place. Therefore, all of our beliefs are coded as true. And that's the human condition. We can't differentiate the true from the false. And unless we understand this basic problem of the human condition, we are screwed. The only answer, in my opinion, is ethics. If we understand that we need a code of ethics, a source of wisdom that's outside of our own minds, because we can't rely on ourselves to make the optimal decisions because we have false beliefs. We need to have a source of wisdom called the code of ethics that we can all agree to optimize the decisions we make that impact other people. Because that's
one of the problems I have with that, Richard. First of all, I'm not going to disagree with anything you say. Anything you just said, I like that. One of the fundamental problems I see, though, is the source of wisdom problem, which is 100 years ago, our source of wisdom was our elders, and our elders were held in such a high regard and respected that the youth would look to them for answers. And now the youth looks to the internet for answers instead of to our elders. And our elders are not that source of wisdom is getting pushed aside when it's, and I think to your point, Libby, I think that's part of what the problem is, right? Like, so that 23-year-old kid that's stopped listening to his grandparents, 5 years ago, because now he has the internet to answer everything. He's losing touch with what ethics are even about and what the difference between right and wrong are, because they're not getting the lessons from the people who lived it. They're getting these lessons from the internet of God knows who, God knows where, God knows how much, and who the heck knows what. It goes back to your thing earlier when you said leaders need followers, followers need leaders. And in that respect, again, social media is the evil one here, because now we're putting credence to people who have 1 million followers who may be worth nothing when it comes to ideological wisdom, right? Like, so we can go round robin on this all day long, I think, right? Like, so but I think, to your point, Libby, I think you're right. These kids coming out of college today are walking out the door thinking, I've already earned that job. I have this college degree, so you're going to give me that job, and I'm going to walk in the door, and it doesn't matter what I do. I'm going to keep that job because I earned it already, because I went to school for 4 years, and now I got this stupid piece of paper that tells me that I read a couple of books and I listened to a couple of lectures. Like that, to me, and one of my foundational problems with higher education is you don't need 4 walls in a professor to be educated. You don't need that to be an educated person, but you do need some of that elder wisdom in order to know the difference between right and wrong. And I think we're losing touch with some of that. It drives me bananas. It really drives me bananas.
All right. So we've kind of talked a little bit about solutions to problem. We're not really talking about solutions. We're talking about what the problems are, right? From social media to disconnection to a lack of ethics, business culture. This is a big, hairy topic, as we've all mentioned, right? A lot of different places to touch on this, a lot of different areas to look at and to focus on. What I want to do, though, is I want to ask us sort of maybe a little bit of a lighter question to sort of transition into a couple of other videos that we've got. So, and it is a question that is on our list of questions today. I had to throw this one in. because I do sometimes get this feedback from listeners, and they do want to hear from probably each one of you on this. What's it like to listen to Hasan ramble before he gets to an actual question? What is that like? Tom has experienced this a lot. That's why he's laughing.
I thought it was from him.
Ah!
Or Dorolo.
or Dorolo, right? Or Dorolo. What is
Okay,
it like?
can I just preface this by, let me just
Yeah, go
give you
ahead.
guys some, because there's an added component to this that I think would make it funnier for the audience, right? Is that Hasan sends us a script that has the questions on it already. So we already know the question he's about to ask when he starts his ramble. So, so what's it like to listen to the ramble? It's like, I would love to tell you it's like nails on a chalkboard, but it's really not, because sometimes you catch a nugget of insight in the question that he's asking that if you're not paying attention, you miss. So I have no problem with it.
Well, that's
You listen
good.
to- wait, I'm sorry, but you listen to that amazing voice? Like, and you call that nails on a chalkboard? I mean, it just sounds intelligent. So I assume there's nuggets in there that I should be, grasping onto. But, as you said, we do know the question. So, but yeah, I mean, how can you not think it's worthwhile?
Maybe that's
that
maybe,
great voice.
maybe I'm getting tone deaf, Hasan, to it, because I don't hear that. Everyone talks
rambling
about
voice.
this all the time. Hasan's got a sexy voice. He's got a great voice. Listen to that voice, and I'm like, what voice? What are you talking about?
Are we each going to have an opportunity to talk about our personalities? Are we each going to get an opportunity to
No.
get the
Just
attention
Hasan.
from us? Are we gonna...
No, because this is my show, because I'm running the deal here. So
Is that why the two videos you showed was about how wonderful you are and how wonderful this
yes, and I'm about to show two more that are going to talk about how wonderful I am.
The power of leadership is setting the tone and the direction.
That is correct. And right now the 100th episode is about me first, and then the books, and then everything else. So yeah, I mean, no, I do tend to ramble. I do, but like I think out loud too. So we ran into this with notoriously recently with Native Son, where I was literally rambling, and Tom called me out, and he goes, "You've forgotten the question." Like, yeah, but I'm getting to something else.
At one point, Hasan, ask me the question.
I've forgotten the question. Forget what's on the paper. The paper doesn't matter. We're in totally different territory now.
The entire lesson for leadership is about Hasan. That's what it's all about, ultimately.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, of course it is. And actually, you know what? Our two guests here our one video here will absolutely positively 100% demonstrate that, showing up. Oh, look at that. And this gentleman, you'll be able to see it on the video. He has a microphone coming out of the top of his head. So you're gonna all love this. Let's go ahead and play this video from my good friend Ryan Stout.
Good day, HSCT family. This is Ryan Stout. I'm currently in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm from Trenton, New Jersey, where I met Hasan Sorrells in Burlington County in New Jersey. We met at Burlington County Community College, and I know the request was to speak on my experience with the show, which is fantastic. It gets me reading, gets me engaged, and I love it. However, I think more telling is the story of how I met Hasan. It was sign-up day for clubs, and the club that I wanted to sign up for did not exist, despite signs being hung all over the school at Burlington County Community College, which I believe is Pemberton something now. Anyway, I grab a piece of loose leaf paper and a pen, and I set up a table at the cafeteria where people were signing up. And I just wrote Creative Writers Guild on a piece of paper. I was the only person there. A couple of people walked by. They kind of looked at the piece of paper. Maybe someone threw the name on, but I don't recall. I don't think so at all. And then here comes Hasan, wearing a long green trench coat. And he means business out of the gate. He started asking me questions about publications and aspirations for the quarter or the semester, Are we planning on doing anything that contributes to the community of Burlington County community as a whole? And so he started asking questions like a CEO, the first time I met him. So it seems only appropriate and fitting that hey, son, you and your ideas have rose to the top, and you're carrying on, my brother. I look forward to see what happens in the future. Thank you kindly for the invite. I'm so sorry I cannot be there. However, I hope this video suffices. Have a beautiful day. Thank you.
Hey son, it's John Hill. Just wanted to give you a quick shout out and give you a quick congratulations on 100 episodes. Man, it takes a lot to do 100 episodes of anything, and not everyone gets there. So just wanted to say well earned, keep going, and I'm looking forward to the episodes that we have planned for later on this year. Good job, man. Talk soon.
That was John Hill. He came on and he talked with us about the way of the samurai, the Miyamoto Musashi book. That is our longest episode. We talked for 4.5 hours about the way of the samurai. And it was an excellent episode. By the way, it's the most downloaded episode we've had so far, the 4-hour long one. So people are actually listening and absorbing that and thinking about that content. And we're going to have John back on this year talking about my personal favorite Western novel of the latter half of the 20th century, Charles Portis's True Grit. And a truly amazing book written by an author who, in the world of an algorithm, probably wouldn't have ever gotten a book deal. He's way too regional, and the book is way too moralistic for our current time. But John's going to be on later on this year. And yes, Richard, in answer to your question, it is all about me right now. Turning the corner a little bit.
Well, great leaders are very honest and are very, they're honest about themselves. And I think it's great that at least you're admitting it.
Right. Yeah, that's the first step to solving the problem.
But I think ultimately great leaders don't talk about themselves.
That is also true. It's a paradox. See, we're coming around to some things. We're resolving some things here. And this is where we're going on the back half of as we wrap up our 100th episode anniversary show. So what topics would we like to see covered in the next 100 episodes? I'm going to start with Libby. What would you like to see covered in the next 100 episodes? Because we're kind of going down this road of solving problems this year, and we're going to keep this going because I do fundamentally believe, and I recorded an episode recently with Brian Bagley about the book The Fourth Turning, and Peter Zehan's book The End of the World is Just the Beginning, about the collapse of globalization and sort of how demography and geography are going to impact globalization at a political, cultural, and even at a business level, right? And so we combined those two books together and had an interesting conversation that'll be released later this month, talking about how America is at the end of a chaotic 25-year period that's part of an 80-year seculum cycle known as the Fourth Turning. So we're at the end of that cycle now. And usually what happens after chaos, usually what happens after a lot of cracks in the foundation of a culture is you get a high, right, where things get fixed. Solutions to problems begin to be put out into the cultural zeitgeist, and people begin moving forward. Things that were unresolved in the last chaotic period tend to remain unresolved, but they don't create as much friction as they used to, and people begin to have a sense of hope. William Howe and Neil Strauss described not the end of the Fourth Turning, but a high in a historical cycle as a spring, right? And so I fundamentally believe, just like in the old show Game of Thrones back in the day, they all used to say winter is coming. Well, I think winter's over culturally in America, and I might be 5 years away from from being dead on this, but I want to be early rather than late. I think winter's over, and I think spring is coming. And I think that the leaders who are going to make it are going to be the ones that stop griping about the past winter and start living in the next spring. But that's really hard if you spent 25 years or the last 30 years of your career just dealing with chaos and confusion, from hanging chads in the year 2000 all the way to COVID right now. We've been dealing with a lot of chaos and confusion, particularly in America, and of course, more generally in the West. But I do think spring is coming. So, solutions to problems, right? What books, what topics, what solutions to problems should we be exploring in the next 100 episodes, Libby?
Ray Dalio's Principles.
Ooh. I have read that book. I did read Ray Dalio's book.
Yeah, I think it's, you could probably do a sub series on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So when Richard was talking about ethics, that was the book that to me came top of mind. And then from a fiction perspective and objectivist perspective, Ayn Rand, Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged.
I think we have Fountainhead on the list for this year. I'm kind of delicate around Ayn Rand because I think she's gotten tagged a lot by people who don't understand what she was actually doing. Plus the lack of sort of religious belief underneath her. Tom was talking about, before we watched a couple of videos, Tom was talking about the source of wisdom. What's the source of wisdom there? And Rand, one of the critiques of Rand is always that she doesn't access a source of wisdom beyond the market. And so that can feel kind of shallow sometimes in her work. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that.
Yeah.
But
who is
that
John
is
Galt?
Right. I don't necessarily agree with that critique, but it is a critique that is thrown out there. And so Rand is one that that we've sort of danced around, but eventually we're going to probably land the plane there. Okay, those are two awesome suggestions. And I agree with you about Dalio's Principles. That book is so thick; it's like a Bible. Like you gotta break it down and go through it. Okay, Richard, what books should we be reading? What topics should we be discussing in the next 100 episodes to solve some of these problems that we have here in our culture? What books should we be referencing?
Well, the two that come to mind just right now is there's a book called Leadership Ensemble, and it was written by Harvey Seifter. I think you know Harvey Seifter.
I do.
Right, and what's so interesting about this book is that when he was the executive director of the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, which is a world-class orchestra. It's the only orchestra in the world that has no conductor. Classically, orchestras have the conductor who is the leader of the orchestra. So, in other words, the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra is leaderless, has no leader like a conductor. But every single musician in the orchestra has to both be a leader and a follower. And so they've created an entire new model for leadership. And it delivers an absolutely profoundly excellent product because of what they've done. So
I would argue that the music is the leader in that example.
Excuse me?
I would argue that that's not new. The music is the leader in that example. The musicians are still followers. They're still following a leader. The leader are the notes in the music. It may not be a conductor, but they're still following a leader in that example.
Well, that's interesting. In other words, the author of the piece, the author of is the leader.
Correct.
Very interesting. So, and the book applies those principles, that new model, also in business. There were major corporations that have adopted that model, and so I think leadership is. So I think that would be a great book to read and to talk about. And the other book that came to mind, the question of who's the greatest leader who ever lived? Who is the most influential human being that ever lived? And so I think one could argue that Abraham is that person, given that half the planet, half of humanity considers Abraham their forefather, their leader, right? They're hearkening to Abraham. And so I'm not talking about religion here. What I'm talking about is what was it about Abraham that enabled him to have such a profound influence over the course of history. There's a book on the market called Abraham's Journey by Rabbi Soloveitchik, which I thought was just a mind-blowing book. I mean, it blew my mind, this book. And I think this is something worth considering. So those are the two books that came to mind right now. I mean, I'm sure there are many more that I could mention, but right now that's what I suggest.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and we've also done, I mean, we've looked at the biblical corpus. We're going to go back and look at the Bible again. Abraham's story is, of course, laid out in the book of Genesis, and Abraham is, to your point, he is a fascinating and multifaceted character. And I hesitate to say character. He was a real human being with real human problems. And I fundamentally believe that the reason the Bible still is the most best-selling book ever, both the Old and the New Testament, is because it describes things that are fundamental through the stories and allegories and parables and just the nature of the history that it describes, that are foundational to actual reality itself, regardless of nation state or time or climate. And so that gets you into some really interesting territory when you're looking at anything that's in the Bible or any individual who's in the Bible.
Well, and then leadership he preceded the Bible by several years, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there was something about him that he's the root of the whole thing. I mean, and so understanding what it was about him and what he was able to do and how he did it, I think would be extraordinarily useful for understanding leadership.
Yeah, and providing solutions to some of our more transcendent problems, which, by the way, will continue to follow us through even on a cultural high. They're not going to go anywhere because human nature remains the same. Go ahead, Tom.
So I have a hard time answering this question just because the simple fact, your whole premise is, leadership lessons from the great books, which are basically pointing toward classic literature. We've already named a few of those authors and stuff. And quite honestly, I don't, Richard, to your point, I was never a big reader when I was a kid, and I was never a big reader growing, into my early adulthood. I had to really be interested in something to read it. Like I really had to have like a vested and it had to, like, I'm all about optimizing time. So to read something fantastical it's not going to benefit me in life most times until I met you, of course. But I'm saying, like, I was thinking, like, reading things like, Of Mice and Men and To Kill a Mockingbird and all these things. I'm like, that's never going to serve me. So I would rather read things like 7 Habits from Stephen Covey or, one of my favorite motivational books like that would be Rick Pitino's Success is a Choice, right? Like, so I've read a lot of those books. Or Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is probably my favorite book of all time. I've read it probably cover to cover 4 or 5 times. I have a first edition book in its original hardbound that I won't let anybody touch. So so when I think of books that I like to read, I think of things like authors like John Neidhart, who was originally a poet who wrote a really, really good book called Black Elk Speaks. That I would probably see as the closest to what you're talking about from like a classic literature standpoint. John Neidhart did a really nice job with that book. It was really well written. Charles Eastman was a native author I believe he was Lakota. Wrote a series of books, any one of which I would think would be a good opportunity for readers to listen and understand, because it's not fiction, it's real life, but the time period really works for what you're thinking about. The Soul of an Indian Boyhood, any of those books by Charles Eastman. And by the way, somebody who was taken to one of the boarding schools that we all are hearing in the news right now, taken to one of those boarding schools, went to Harvard University got a medical degree, and then went back to the reservation to be a doctor for his people. So he basically said, if you're going to force me to do this, I'm going to get the most out of it, and then see you later. He just went back to his people. Really brilliant guy when it comes to some of that stuff. So I would have no problem doing any one of those that I've just said, whether it's 7 Habits from Stephen Covey, Rick Pitino's Success is a Choice. There's another one called The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson, which is another decent book. But older books would be more like, Black Elk Speaks and anything from Charles Eastman. So, but again, to your point, several times, that it doesn't really matter what the book is. If we read it, we can probably learn from it. So I have no objection to pretty much anything that you throw. I thought Lawrence of Arabia was going to be a joke, and it was not. It was a really good episode. So, things like that. Like I don't think we would have a hard time. I don't think we would have a hard time with any book that you chose to get the information to your audience that you want to get to.
Yeah. Libby, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so how do you really feel, Tom?
Well, I mean, and you know what? I will say, I will give a little inside baseball here. I will give a little inside baseball. So before we start recording, we do sometimes have a little bit of a conversation, a little bit of a catch up, usually 5 or 10 minutes. Sometimes might be a little bit longer, just sometimes cut into our recording time. And yes, I do have a script. I do send it out to folks. People know what I'm going to read before they get it. They know what references in the book I'm going to pull out. I give them all that information because I try to front load all of those pieces for the guest, because this is not a gotcha space, right? This is a discovery space. This is an education space, right? I don't believe in playing gotcha games. I think that that's actually one of the things that leads to a decline in trust and more polarization in our culture overall. I have zero interest in any of that. That's not me behaving ethically. Point is, and if I've never met you before, if you're a first-time guest coming on, this is for anybody who's listening, by the way, to this episode. If you want to come on to this show, please, the door's open. Bring your favorite book. But know that I'm going to have a little bit of a getting to know you kind of conversation, because if I don't know you, then I can't really position the book well for you. Matter of fact, I met somebody last year who we talked, and this is just an example of this. We talked very briefly in a networking conversation, and he's a vice president of a major organization in the United States. And we talked about the podcast, and he said, that is a fascinating and amazing idea. Dune is my favorite book. And I said, I looked at Dune by Frank Herbert once when I was 8 years old. It had little tiny type, the version my mother had, little tiny, like 10-point type. And the book was like 500 pages thick. I made it through about 8 pages of that when I was 8, and I never looked back at it. I never went back. And now there's a Dune movie that's out. It's not the one from the 1980s. There's 2, right? There's a sequel coming, right? There's coming next month, right? And he goes, dude, he literally got so excited. He got so animated. He goes, dude, I gotta read this book. It's got everything. It's got politics. It's got ecology. It's got business. It's got warfare. It's got all the stuff you're talking about in your podcast. He sold me on Dune in 20 minutes, and he did not stop talking about Dune. And I said, that's the podcast right there. I need you to bring that energy and come on the podcast to talk about Dune. And so guess what? In August, when we cover sci-fi books, which we will be covering sci-fi books in August, Fahrenheit 451, the books of Philip K. Dick. Oh yeah. John Hill's going to be coming back for that. We will be talking about Frank Herbert's Dune. So I'll be going back into Dune after a 34-year drought.
Neil Ferguson wrote a book entitled Dune.
He did? Oh, yeah, dude, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is this book. I don't know when Frank Herbert wrote Dune. I don't know, but it's about like spice trade and some other stuff. And then, of course, the movies, which this will be our brief thing, and then we'll close out here. So one of the ideas that I have, because Tom and I have talked about movies. Matter of fact, we did a review of Oppenheimer. That was one of our bonus episodes at the end. And I love talking about movies. I insert a cinematic reference into almost every single podcast episode I do, because I'm also a huge movie guy, gigantic movie guy, right? And I've disciplined myself to not do a podcast on movies. But if we were to do a podcast on movies, what movies would you want to see me cover? Or what movie would you want to see me cover? Leadership lessons from the great films. Go ahead, Richard. What would you want to see me cover?
The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Okay. Great book, too. Libby?
Empire Strikes Back.
Ooh.
You even sounded like the laser. Exactly.
Careful, I don't alter the deal. I used to tell that to some of my employees sometimes. Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, come on. Really? Okay, so let's see. The Godfather 2, definitely up there. The Godfather 2. Let's see. There has to be a reference in there. Office Space. There has to be. You gotta look at Indiana Jones for sure. I can probably list off 20. Like, what are you talking about? We can get this started tomorrow. Let's go. Like, what are you waiting for?
Let's have these movies right now. Well,
when I heard about the trench coat and Hasan in a trench coat, Breakfast Club came to mind.
Breakfast Club.
I was John Cusack in Breakfast Club. I was that guy. Godfather. So I was talking with somebody about this.
Godfather 2 specifically. But
Godfather 2?
Yeah.
The original Godfather, the first 20 minutes of that is the most genius in cinematic history of how to do exposition, how to introduce characters and set up a culture. Like, it's amazing.
That's one of the reasons why the Godfather trilogy is still considered probably the best 3 consecutive movies in cinematic history. Number one. Number two, The Godfather 2 is probably the #1 sequel ever made, ever. Like, people can't reproduce the success a movie has, almost never. But The Godfather 2 was actually more impactful than 1, which is unheard of, right? So anyway, we're on the wrong podcast for this, but
we are on the wrong podcast for this. Go ahead, Richard.
I'm starting to realize that I'm talking about myself now. That I'm very sentimental, because the other 2 movies that came to mind is Love Story and The Summer of 42.
Yes.
Both good. Yeah, both good, Richard.
Both are good.
What are you talking about? Dirty Dancing should be on there. I mean, I'm not talking strictly sci-fi here, Richard. I think Dirty Dancing, The Proposal with Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds.
Why not Saturday Night Fever? If we
Saturday Night Fever, Grease. Come on, Grease would be a great one.
I'll do the soundtrack for Grease.
The Graduate, yes.
The Graduate, yeah.
I was just talking about Dustin Hoffman the other day.
One that I think, and it's probably obscure and nobody would think about it this way, but the original, the very first Jurassic Park, I think would be an awesome one to do for leadership.
That movie has some of the most quotable lines in relation to chaos and everything falling apart I've ever seen come out of a character's mouth in Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah.
That is one of the scariest movies I've ever watched. That's scary.
That one, and then he doubles down in Jurassic Park: Lost World.
Yeah.
And the great line in there, and I always think about it, ironically enough, when I think of our global leaders and the next generation of global leaders who are coming into the fore right now, I think of the line he said to John Hammond's son. He said, you sound like John Hammond. This is Jeff Goldblum. You sound like John Hammond. You say the words of John Hammond. You even look like John Hammond a little bit. But you're no John Hammond. You haven't made the mistakes yet to earn being John Hammond. But when you do, I'll be there to remind you that now you're John Hammond. And of course, John Hammond's son, who's all prickly and corporate, goes, get the hell out of here. And later on, when John Hammond's son does make a huge mistake by spoiler alert, letting the Tyrannosaurus Rex run around San Diego, Jeff Goldblum sidles up to him and goes, now you're John Hammond. And it harkens back to the idea in a very cinematic way that the old Roman Empire had. So when a new Roman emperor would come into power, he would always have a servant behind him who would whisper, something to keep him sane, to keep him balanced, to keep him in his ego, or keep him out of his ego. Because the Romans understood that ego is the thing that kills a leader, particularly ego when they think that they are better than those who came before. Now you're John Hammond. I love that line in Law School. That was a good one.
Another one just popped in my head too, that again, obscure version of leadership, but gone in 60 seconds.
Actually, yeah, the most recent one was really good.
Yeah.
You mean, is this the one where Nicolas Cage waves his fingers around his head, goes, and then, okay, yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, but Nicolas Cage leads a ring of thieves that they all like, again, obscure version of it, but I think it would be an interesting conversation on how
I was actually thinking Fast and Furious.
Oh yeah.
Well, they're up to 10 of those. It's like Ray Dalio's Principles. You got to do a whole series on that.
The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise.
Ooh, yeah.
That would be a good one too.
All right.
I mean, we can just keep going with this.
We can just keep going with this. Yeah, we can just keep going with this. All right. All right, we got to wrap up the show. I want to thank Libby Unger. I want to thank Richard Messing. And I want to thank Tom Libby for coming on today. I want to thank our folks who joined us via video, Brian Bagley, John Hill, RJ St. John, and Ryan Stout. We also have a couple other folks who are going to be joining us at the end, DeRolo Nixon, and Dave Baumrucker are going to be joining us at the end via video. But I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us for this 100th episode of the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Anything for us to close? 2 minutes. Anything? Any final thoughts? Any final words? Anything for leaders to help them stay on the path with this podcast?
I'll start. Keep at it. Just like Hasan has, one step in front of the other, 1 foot in front of the other. And it's a compounded interest effect. Just keep working at it and you'll gain the momentum and create the flywheel. And that way you find success.
Go ahead, Richard.
I just want to suggest that that the path to becoming a true powerful leader is not to have it be about you, not to have it be for your own personal gain. Have what you're doing be totally about other people and what you can do to empower and to contribute to other people. And then you will become an amazing leader.
So first things, thank you, Hasan, for having me on here. It's been my honor and pleasure to be, co-host with you several times at this point now over the past year and a half or so. I'm totally looking forward to this coming year. I know that we already have set our schedule for certain books on the agenda. I'm really looking forward to most of them, if not all of them. But I know there's a couple that I'm looking forward to more than others. So to sign off, and for me, I would just say, just be fearless. And I don't mean fearless as being overly aggressive or like being a jerk about it. But I'm saying don't be afraid to make mistakes in the essence of Jeff Goldblum there until you become John Hammond, right? So don't be afraid, don't be fearful, make decisions and make this, and lead people in a way that you can feel good and comfortable with, and be fearless, because you're going to make mistakes. You are. But as long as you can learn from them and be better because of them, you will be a better leader in the long term. So be fearless.
And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. And we're out.
Good morning. My name is DeRolo Nixon Jr., and this video is to wish HSCT Publishing and its CEO, Hasan Sorrells, congratulations on the 100th episode of the great podcast, Leadership Lessons from the Great Books. I've had the privilege and I believe the honor of being a guest on that podcast several times. Among the works that we've covered are William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the Federalist Papers by some of the most eminent founders and framers of the United States Republic, the Anti-Federalist Papers, the Declaration of Independence, and some other works. Anyway, the podcast is a great tool for any leader because leadership, at its most basic, is communication to other people about the circumstances necessary for them to follow you to achieve the goals of whatever the group, body, organization, or team are. And so the great books themselves are examples of that communication. And so I thoroughly enjoyed the podcast, and I recommend it to leaders everywhere.
Hey Son, congratulations on 100 episodes for the Leadership Lessons from Great Book podcast. It's been an honor to be a part of this podcast with you and have some of these really deep conversations about the world's best authors and the lessons we can take with them, not only in our own lives, but as we become leaders to lead others in our lives. I was able to be a part of episode 6, where we talk about Kundera's unbearable lightness of being, exploring his critique of Christian moralism and this ethos of convenience versus this ethos of virtue. Additionally, I was able to be a part of episode 15, where we talk about crime and punishment, and exploring our morality and totality and totalitarianism, and this idea of a transcendent morality. And more importantly, the intersection of all of these ideas and the impact it can have on one's morality, and how this plays a role in leadership and how we lead and how we manage ourselves as a leader. I look forward to many more great things from you and many more wonderful conversations where we highlight all these wonderful lessons we can take with us in our waking lives. With that, congratulations again on 100 episodes, and I look forward to many more great things from you. Take care.
Hey there, this is Momin Kazi, and I guest hosted 2 episodes of the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast with Hasan. And as a professor of English at Tarleton State University, it was a sincere pleasure to dig in, dig down, and really mine in a meaningful way the insights that both Joseph Conrad's and Chinua Achebe's landmark novels offer. Hasan, you're a skillful guide. You ask great questions, and you're doing a tremendous job leading the way on some of the most enriching, best discussions imaginable. Congratulations, my friend. Your intellectual curiosity has helped create some of the most diverse and enriching conversations that are imaginable. So congratulations on episode 100. It's a great milestone, and I'm looking forward to
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons
100.
from the Great Books
Cheers.
podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.